Hey everyone, welcome back to Shop Life. We're here today with a 2012 BMW 135i. Since it is a 2012, this one has the N55 engine. So anybody that has an N55 engine, whether it's an F10, F30, even an E82, E90, E92, this video will help you guys change your starter out. So in the process of changing the starter, we are going to be removing the intake manifold. So that's a free DIY that you're getting as well with this whole setup. You would want to remove your intake manifold if you were going to do a walnut blast or something. The N55s are a little bit better than the N54 as far as the carbon buildup on the valves, but we're going to see how it looks on here. It's also a good time to change your oil filter housing gasket, your oil cooler gasket, and just even put in an oil catch can if you really wanted to. We're going to have DIYs on most of those things, probably not in this exact video, but just overall. So we're just going to go ahead and get started with the starter change. The starter that we're going to be replacing on here is made by Valeo. So you can find that anywhere at your local parts store or online, ECS Tuning, FCP Euro, wherever you choose to buy your parts. We will have it linked down below. If you use the link, it does help us out a little bit with the whole affiliate stuff. So we would appreciate if you do use the link, but otherwise just go find it using that part number wherever you'd like. To begin, what you really want to do first is go ahead and remove the battery, at least the terminals. You want to remove the positive and the negative. That way there's no charge going anywhere, and then we'll continue on with the front. On the 1 Series, it's very simple. You just lift up the little back section, and then we're going to just use a 10mm socket, loosen the terminals, negative first, pull it off. Then we're also going to do the positive. The positive one does have a little bit of a trick to it. You got to push down on these metal sections and pull them out. And then you just lift up and move it out of the way. There we go. Now make sure you don't shut your trunk. If you do shut your trunk by accident, you will need some kind of secondary battery or a jump box to charge the front terminals. That way you can open the trunk to hook the battery back up. One thing that you will need to have also is the intake manifold gaskets. They're just simple O-rings, but it's good to have those. Another thing is the actual breather hose for the whole crankcase system. That tends to be brittle whenever you're removing it, so that's also a good thing to have. With that being said, let's just start out by removing this whole cabin filter assembly. You're going to need an 8mm socket. 1 bolt right there, 1 right here. These tend to strip quite often. A quick tip, if it does strip, is to get a little bit bigger size bolt. So these are 8, but you can go to Home Depot and find something that's like a self-tapping bolt, and that's a little bit thicker. You've got 2 bolts right here. And 2 more right here. And do not use any power tools on this, because if you do use power tools, you are more than likely going to strip the rest of the opening. Once you have them out, you can just lift this up. There we go. Now let's remove the wiring harnesses from right here. Push the tab in, pull it out. Now these clips are a little bit tricky. If they haven't been removed before, you're just going to have to wiggle them. See, there's a little metal section in there that has like little forks, I don't know what to call them, but they grab onto this plastic tab right here. There we go. Put this to the side. Now to remove the cover, there's a tab on each side. 1 right here, 1 right here. Just lift them up a little bit and pull it up. You should also have this section that slides into this little opening. So just pull it to a little bit this way while you're lifting up and you'll be good to go. Same thing with right here, but as you can see, it's whoever removed it last time, they didn't put it back. Now do the same thing on this side. Pull that out. 1 clip, another clip. Bam. Now you're gonna have 2 8mm bolts, 1 right here and 1 on the other side at the same exact spot. These bolts are different than the ones that were on the actual filter housing itself. As you can see, they're not self-tapping, they're just a normal metric thread. This process is very similar on the N54 as well. So if you are here for an N54, you are going to have a little section right here that clips onto the bottom of this cabin filter housing, and if it is there, you're just going to clip it off or remove the harnesses from inside. It's very self-explanatory. There's no bolts, just the little tabs. Besides that, now you're just going to lift up from the front right here and pull towards you. And if this rubber seal comes off, just clip it right back in. So you can see the tabs where the rubber seal would sit, and it clamps onto the actual cowl. With that out of the way, let's continue removing the airbox. So this one, we're actually missing a few things here, but if you have it, you're gonna have to remove the screws that go to this little first section of the air cowl. Yours are probably gonna be a T20 bolt or screw. Once that's out, you can just push it towards the engine, and then there's the airbox. Release the clip. There's one on each side. And you're just gonna wiggle your way out. Now, as far as the airbox goes, you're gonna have to remove these cables. There's these rubber grommets on each one. So just lift up the rubber grommet and off of this metal clamp. There's 3 of them. Just remove all 3, so it'll be like this. And what you're gonna do is just gonna lift it up and put it to the side. Do that for each one of these. Now you have this connector right here. For the connector, you're gonna push the tab down. Here's the tab. Push this tab down with your thumb or a flathead screwdriver and pull the connector out. Make sure you're grabbing it by the plastic part and not the harness. We're gonna go to remove this cover as well, just to make it easier to access everything. Cover is just gonna be clipped in. Lift up from the front and then slide it out from the back. So you can see the back has these 2 tabs, slides in. This one's missing one of the rubber grommets. If yours falls out, make sure you keep it in here or just take it out and put it back before you put everything back. The front sections just push in to these little dowels right here on the valve cover itself. Now we're going to use a 6mm socket, or you can use a flathead to loosen this clamp that goes to the airbox. With that loose, you can lift up the airbox. There's no bolts holding it, just it's in the grommets like how the front cover was. So just lift it up. There's 3 sections where it's like grommeted in, and then you're gonna push this boot off of the actual housing itself. Now we have a pretty good view of the whole intake manifold, as well as the charge pipe and everything, but we are gonna have to remove this plastic cover. That way we have more access to the rest of the bolts for the manifold. We're gonna remove this whole intake boot right here. Now we're going to remove these strut bars. We're going to remove them anyways, but we're going to remove both of these. That way it's easier to remove this cover. You could probably do it without removing it, but then you might risk cracking this plastic cover, which we don't want to do. So you're going to have 2 E14 bolts, one on each strut tower. Then you have one more bolt in the middle. You have this cover that's covering it. Get like a pretty thick flathead screwdriver. Turn it counterclockwise. Once you turn it counterclockwise, you should be able to just lift it up and off. The bolt that's inside is an external Torx 18. Just loosen it, and then you should be able to slide out each of these strut bars. I just want to take a quick pause to thank all the join members. They really do help me make all of these DIYs, because it does take me a lot longer to film and do all of this. And then Selena, my fiance behind the camera, she also has to edit all of this, so it also takes her quite a bit of time. So thank you guys a lot. If you guys wanted to become a join member, there's a link in the description, or if you're on a desktop, there might be a button somewhere. Click on that. I really do appreciate all of the help and support. Now let's get back to the DIY. Okay, so with that being said, with all of this more open, now we can remove this plastic cover. First, you're gonna remove all of these all the wiring. It just clipped in with these little tabs. Just lift it up and off. Now this, like the cover that was up here, is just pushed in with grommets. So lift it up gently. You want to get as close to the grommet when you're lifting up, that way you don't crack it by accident. So one right here where this divot is, one right here, one back here, and one right here. Now there's all this rubber, noise foam, insulation, heat insulation, whatever it is. Sometimes it does crumble, so just try to keep your hand underneath it. That way you can take it out as a whole. You can see? You see it's starting to crumble right there. Now this will also be a good time to take care of your spark plugs when you have all of this open. One thing on the N55s, even the N54s, it's always a great idea to go ahead and change out the ignition coils as a whole set. Don't just do one at a time, because they like to go out, and when one goes out, the other ones will probably go out pretty soon right after. So you have a lot of space right here. Go ahead and knock that out, the spark plugs and the ignition coils. But let's get back to the intake manifold. Now if it helps you, it would be great to label all of these connectors. Just get some kind of paint marker or something, and you can just put like a line to it or put a number. I mean, the connectors all go in one spot anyways. I mean, there's not really, you know, it's pretty much formed into the section that it'll go to, but it does help out. So if that's gonna make it easier for you, go ahead and do that. But for me, I'm just gonna remove them. You just press this tab in right here. Push the tab in and pull by the connector, not the wiring. We're also going to remove this one. The tab is on the bottom, and then push it off. Now you've got this wiring is actually just with a push tab right on top of the intake manifold. So we're just going to push that tab out. So here's the tab. You just want to get your fingers on each side of this from underneath and just push it out. So you want to push it down because it goes and clips right onto this hole on the manifold. Now we have the purge valve right here. This one has a metal clip on it. So you just press the metal tab and then slide it off. You can also pull off the purge valve off of this rubber and just let it hang down there. Now we're going to remove this pipe right here, but first there's a connector. Same thing as the rest, there's a tab. Push the tab in, and then push the tab in and push the connector down. Here's the tab. Connector down, this is a 4-pin. Now let's get on to removing this pipe as well as the throttle body. To remove this clamp, you're going to need a 7mm socket or a flathead screwdriver. Just loosen it. Sometimes these clamps like to slide off and they'll fall all the way down. If they do, just grab like a magnet or something and that'll make it easier. You're also going to need a Torx 30 bit to remove this bolt. Now we're going to remove this metal clip. You can use a pry bar or a flathead. Pull it up, it'll lock in place. And now we're going to remove this section off of the charge pipe. Well, I got this side off. Now let's get this side off. Ow. All right, let's put this to the side. Now we're going to use a 10mm socket to remove the 4 bolts holding in the throttle body. Now with all 4 bolts removed, we have access to the purge valve hose. So you have 2 plastic tabs on each side of the hose. Push those in, and that will release the hose. So you push these 2 in like that, and you twist it and pull it off from there. Now you also have the connector for the throttle body, just held in with 1 tab. Push the tab in, and pull by the connector. There you go. Alright, now we're going to remove some of the wiring, that way we have more access to the bolts for the intake manifold. So we're just going to pull up off of these tabs. Same with this. And there's a connector in the back. So this one, what you have to do is you have to slide it towards the passenger side. So just go from the back and push it that way. You can try to lift this tab up, and when you lift it up, it'll release it. Then you also have a couple more wires.
I would have gave up by now.
Now, one thing that would make this process a whole lot easier is if you remove each and every single connection from the DME. So we're just gonna go ahead and do that. You don't really have to, you can do it without, but then you're just gonna be messing with all these wires to, get the manifold off. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna start off by removing the first connector right here. Can you see it?
I don't even know what's that.
Right here. Here, let me pull it off and then I'll show them. Here's the first one. So what you have to do is gonna be like this, just like this on the actual DME. You gotta push this tab in. When you push it in, then you can push this one over it. And as this goes down, you pull it up and it'll come off. There's one. Do that same thing for the second. There's the second. And the same thing for the third. You can mark them, but you do have to remove the first one first. And the pins are actually a little bit different on each one, but you don't want to try to mistakenly put each one in. So what I would do is start out with the first one, put number 1 on it, like with a paint marker, then do the second and do the third. I know where they go, so it's easy for me to do it, but if this is your first time doing it, definitely mark it. Now you have a little bit more, play with the wiring, that way you can move it around. Here's a pressure sensor connector on the fuel rail. Push the tab on the bottom. Push the tab on the bottom, and pull or push the connector off. With this one, same thing. You push the tab, pull the connector off. I just want to carefully guide all of this wiring out of the way. And now we can set it to the side. Now the wiring that's remaining is a lot easier to manage. So you can just tuck it on the bottom and the back of the engine. This one you can disconnect from right here. There's 2 tabs, 1 on each side. One on this side, 1 on that side. Push them in, lift up. This wiring, if you really wanted to take it out, you could. But we don't need to, we can just put it to the side. Now with most of the wiring out of the way, we still have 3 more connectors that we have to remove. We're gonna start out by removing the first one all the way towards the back of the engine. So that one, let me remove the connector.
This is hard to film.
Yeah, let me remove the connector and then I'll show you what I'm talking about, or how to remove it. All right, so what you have to do, so it's sitting like this. You have to push out this tab, push it towards the bottom. And as you're pushing it, you want to pull this up. And while you do that, it'll pop the whole thing off. Just like that, and you lift it up. Now you have two more connectors. These just have normal tabs on each side. As I remove each one, I'll show you. Here's the first one that's on the top. This tab right on this side, and this tab on this way. And it's sitting just like this on the top. And you just push the two tabs in, pull up. Now you want to do the same thing for the bottom one. One tab on this side, one tab on that side. Push them in, pull up. Now you can tuck this out of the way. All of this wiring, you can tuck that out of the way. Now, another thing, since we are going to be removing the starter, you can pull off this power, the positive terminal cable. It's just held in with a 13mm nut that goes right here. And that'll just make it a little bit easier, less clutter. Since we have the battery unhooked, including the positive terminal, it's not charged at all. So you shouldn't really have to worry about doing anything. But if you didn't have the positive terminal removed, what you could possibly do, if you ground out your socket or something, you could cause some kind of electric shock and possibly blow one of those main fuses. Now usually there's a cover on top of this assembly. There's no cover on this one. If there is, it's just held in with clips, so you could just pull it off. Now we're going to remove these clips so that way we don't break them when we're removing these nuts. In order to do that, you want to push down on it right here. When you push down, it'll release one of the tabs. Here's a tab. So you want to push down, it'll pop out of the hole, and then you can lift it up. There we go. Another thing you can do is remove the O2 sensor wiring from these clips, the metal clips. That way you have a little bit more play in them to push them to the back. So they just pop right out. And then out of these, there's two tabs right here that look like this. And you can just pop those out as well. And that you can just tuck it to the side. That way you have more space over here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to remove this hose that goes to the actual high pressure fuel pump. In order to do that, there's two tabs. One on each side. You want to push them. So you want to push one on each side. You can use like a pry bar or something like a flathead, but you don't want to go too crazy with it, because if you crack it, then it's not going to seal properly. It's not going to sit. So with that out of the way, we had to take it out from the bottom where it goes to the high pressure fuel pump. So once you remove the section from the valve cover, you should be able to just pull this hose off. Now with all the wiring out of the way, there's nothing else on the bottom of the intake manifold. You should be able to just take off this bolt right here, the rest of the nuts all the way across. They're all 11mm, and then you should be able to pull off the whole intake manifold. But first, I highly recommend that you vacuum or you wipe down all of the dirt. That way you don't have any dirt or debris falling into the engine. Now we're just going to use an 11mm socket and remove all the bolts and nuts. There's 2 bolts and the rest are nuts. Now you're just going to lift up and out. Now let's get a good look at those intake valves. Okay, actually they're not too bad. They're really not bad at all. This engine has 75 or close to 77,000 miles, and they've never been walnut blasted before. So the N54s, they actually need it like almost every 30,000 miles. On this, it's actually really, really good, not bad at all. One thing that does worry me though is how there's some oil that's seeping past cylinder 1 and into this bolt hole. That's probably just because that gasket is on its way out and some of that oil made its way over there. But since we are going to be installing a catch can on here as well, hopefully we won't have that issue anymore. But yeah, so a good tip now is to stuff either lint-free towels in there or put some tape or something on it. That way you don't drop anything into the actual intake ports. Now that we've got everything covered, let's remove the starter. In order to do that, you're going to have to remove this connector. It's a 1-pin connector. You just push that in, pull it off. Now you have the positive terminal, which is held in with a 13mm nut. Once again, you want to make sure your positive and your negative are off of the battery, or at least from that terminal on the passenger side of the engine bay. You can pull it off with this clip if it makes it a little bit easier. And then just tuck it to the side. But you have one bolt going through this side, and you have another bolt going through the transmission side. So you're going to need one of these, which you can pick up at Harbor Freight. It's just a 3/8 flexible head, and it also ratchets. And you're going to need an E12 socket. I would recommend getting a short one. That way you have enough space to get to the back. Now just feed it in there. All right, once it's on there, make sure the socket's on it all the way. You definitely don't want to strip this head. And then you're gonna loosen it. Once it's loose enough, you're just gonna have to use your fingers. You can put the sockets on it still and just try to take it off the rest of the way. All right, so here's the bolt that's on the transmission side. It's definitely longer than the one that goes from the intake side to the transmission. Now for the second bolt, you want to make sure you get an extension. That way you're past the starter. You also have this fuel line in the way, so make sure you don't damage that too much. And also for the crankshaft position sensor, the connector is right there as well. So we're gonna make sure you don't damage the wiring on that. But once again, this is also external Torx 12 volt. And this one is a little bit shorter, well, a lot a bit shorter. With that last bolt out of the way, now you just have to pull it off. Bam. There's a lot of clutch material in there. Now here's the new Valeo Starter, made in Poland. We're gonna put it back in. Line up the holes, should slide all the way in. We're gonna start with the small bolt. Get it threaded in there. Now take the long bolt, go from the back. Now we're just gonna try to thread in as much as we can with our hands, because the socket obviously is not gonna ratchet as much. So don't tighten this short one yet, just do the back one first and get that one as far in as you can. Then we'll tighten that one first, and then we'll tighten the short one the rest of the way. All right, so I finished cleaning all the intake valves. I walnut blasted them, got all of the buildup off. If you need to do that, I don't have a DIY for it, just because I didn't have the time to do that right now. But there's other DIYs out there, make sure you go check them out if you need it. And then we're also gonna be doing a catch can install just to prevent any buildup from happening in the future. But anyways, besides that, I did hook up the starter the rest of the way. You guys saw me tying down these bolts for the starter, but I also went ahead and put the power cable back on, secured it with a 13mm nut. And then only other thing that we have to do is hook up the actual wire that goes to it for the connector. So that one, you're just gonna push it on, and it's just a 1-pin connector. All right, so I went ahead and cleaned all the mating surfaces, changed out all the intake manifold O-rings. There's 6 of them. Got all those changed out. Cleaned up some of the oil buildup that was in there. And now we're ready to put everything back together. So just double check once again, make sure there's no debris in any of those intake holes, or intake ports, sorry. If there is, go ahead and clear it out. You can use an air gun, a vacuum with the straw attached to it or something. Just clear it out as best as you can. Now make sure all the wires in the back are not in the way. Now we can secure the intake manifold with the bolts and nuts. Once again, these are all 11mm bolts and nuts. Here's the 2 bolts, and here are the 5 nuts. So we'll start by just hand tightening some of these bolts in. If you need to lift up the manifold with your hand a little bit, that way you're not really putting too much pressure against the bolt. It'll make it a little bit easier to tighten it or hand tighten it. And And you always want to do the bolts first, that way you can line those up. The nuts, since the studs come through, that's not going to be hard to put the nut on there at all. Since we already have the manifold tightened down all the way, make sure you're going in like a zigzag pattern. So you want to start in the middle. So do this one, don't tighten it down all the way, but tighten it a little bit so that way there's no more, so pretty much hand tighten it. Then go to this one, then go to that one, then go to that one, that one, that one, and then the corner one at the last. And then once you have all of those tightened down, then you start with an actual torque wrench. Start in the middle, same pattern, just follow it the whole way. And at the very end, just go over them one more time, just make sure everything's nice and tight. You don't want to over tighten them because it is a plastic manifold. Now let's begin routing some of the wiring back. So we'll start with the one that's coming up from the front of the engine. Once it's passed through, we have this connector right here that goes to the sensor on the fuel rail. Go ahead and clip that in. These two are just going to stay on the top of everything. You've got this one that goes to the back. There's a little tab where it has to slide in. You want to have these two connectors pushed in together. This is where I said you should want to have it like labeled with a paint pen or something. That way you know where each one goes. It just makes it a lot easier. For me, I already know where they go, so I'm able to just do it by, memory. And then there's a clip in the back where you're going to be able to slide this on. There we go. It just slides right onto it with that whole connector. This can get tucked into right here. Now you have this connector, plugs into the top of the manifold. You also have this connector right here. Then you have the little metal, the plastic tab that attached to the bottom of the manifold. Just push it in. We can guide this hose back onto the high pressure fuel pump and then plug it into the valve cover. You want to go through this opening in the intake manifold, guide it down, and then you just want to push it onto the high pressure fuel pump. There's a small fitting right there. So it's hooked onto that without any clamps, so you can literally just lift it right up with no problems. Now we can guide it onto the valve cover. And if your O-ring is like really hard to push in, you can use some silicone spray on the O-ring. That way it flashes off, and then just push it in. You'll hear it clip in. Now we have this wire that also goes to the valve cover. Now you want to make sure you guide it right so that it plugs in. Just look at the pins and make sure they line up. Alright, so let's put the clips back onto the fuel rail. One more. You want to slide it over it first. Then you want to push this section down, let it go into the hole, and it'll slide right back up. Now we can put these wiring harnesses back in there. Route this one around here, just like that. And if you did remove your O2 sensors from the clips, go ahead and clip them back in like how I did right here. And also these these plastic clips, make sure those are all back in as well. And you also want to go ahead and hook up the positive cable back with the 13mm nut. And if you didn't remove it and you had just unhooked the battery, then you don't have to worry about that. Now these wires, you can see how I've put them back in their brackets as well, right here. Now we can start plugging things back in to the controller in the bottom of the manifold. So you should have already had these marked, so I'm just going to go ahead and put them back and then show you guys how I have them back arranged. just in case you didn't have it. Now one other connector that you're gonna have to bring back over this way is the one that goes to this box right here, that we had it resting right here. Just goes over the top of everything just like this. And this one is actually the first connector this way. So number 1 right there. This one's number 2, the one with the yellow. And the third one is this one right here with the red wires. But before any of these, you have to put in these two. So this one goes to the sensor on top of the valve cover. And this connector should already be down here just waiting. So put all that in. And then you want to put in this one. This is the one that has the slide out clip. So you want to make sure the clip is all the way out first. Push the connector in. As you're pushing it in, you're going to push the clip in to lock it in place. Once those 3 are hooked up, then you want to start with this one first, then this one second, and this one last. And then you also want to make sure all of your wires, there's a little bracket or a tab right here in the back. You want to make sure everything is sitting in there. That way there's nothing dangling on the side. There's going to be a couple of wires that have brackets also reattached over here, which we didn't move, so you shouldn't have to worry about that. But besides that, on top of the manifold, just have these wires going through the bracket, just that way they're not dangling around. So now we've got 3 connectors left. This one right here, which goes to the top of the air box. Then we have this one right here, which is also hooked up to one of these harnesses that goes to that controller. So this one goes to the purge valve, which is right here. And the wire is going to feel like it's just dangling right here, but there's a bracket on the air box that this clips into. So this goes to the purge valve right there. And then we have this spot, this hose from the purge valve that goes to the throttle body. And then the last connector on the bottom, which is for the throttle body. So once all that's pretty much put back together, then the only thing that we have remaining is going to be the connector that goes to the charge pipe. So once the purge valve hooks up to the throttle body, then we can clip this back on right here. So for now, I'm just going to leave it disconnected, and let's hook up the throttle body. So I went ahead and cleaned out the throttle body. You don't want to mess with the flap when you're cleaning it, so just use some brake cleaner or throttle body cleaner. Just clean all around it. You can use like a rag, like a microfiber, that way you don't leave any lint behind. And here are the bolts that go on the throttle body. They're 10mm bolts, and there's a total of 4 of them. So the purge valve hooks up like this. Push it on, and you'll hear it clip in. Then you also have the throttle body connector, which is right here. And that goes to the bottom. The push tab is going to go towards the bottom. Make sure the throttle body gasket's in there still. And go ahead and hand tighten all the bolts. Once again, that's a 10mm socket. When you're tightening down the throttle body bolts, make sure you're doing one at a time, going diagonally. And you don't want to over tighten these because they are like a self-tapping kind of screw. So you don't want to strip out the threads in the manifold. So we have all that hooked up, all the bolts are tight. Now we can secure the purge valve onto its bracket. So just that rubber section just goes right on there. Then we have this connector for the purge valve. The metal clip goes towards the bottom. You'll hear it click in. Now, the only thing we have left down here is the one that goes to the charge pipe. And then up here, we still have the one that goes to the air box. All right, so now we've got the charge pipe. Make sure the O-ring is still good on the inside. This one's fine. We've got the C-clip right here. And make sure the hose clamp for this side is already on here or on this, regardless, whichever way you want to have it. You want to route this down in there. I like to go ahead and put it on the throttle body first. You'll hear it clip in. Now we can put it onto the lower charge pipe. Then we'll just tighten down the clamp. And once again, this is a 7mm socket or a flathead. We have one connector at the bottom that goes to the sensor on the charge pipe. And the tab is going to be facing towards the firewall. Push it on, you'll hear it clip on. And we have one more bolt, it's a Torx 30. you want to push this section into the grommet and tighten the bolt down. For the airbox, we need to put this cover back on. So you're going to route the cover. These 3 wires are going to go over the top. Make sure this sensor, this connector is out here. Now you're going to see where there's the grommets and there's little studs coming out from the valve cover where you're going to push it onto. And you should also be able to line all this up with the openings, this sensor wire right here, and just push them in. We can clip these wires in as well. Now we have the coupler for the airbox. Here's the connector. But first we're going to slide this on. Here's the connector for the airbox. You should be able to push down on the airbox into the grommets. There's 3 of them. 1, 2, and 1 underneath right here. Now here's that plastic bracket I was talking about for the purge wire connector. So you just want to clip that back in. Then you have these 3, the power cable. These rubber things just slide over the metal. Middle one, and the last one. Got the front cover. There's 2 hooks. And you should have 2 grommets in here. We're missing one, but make sure the grommets are in. Then you want to slide that into the grommets first. And then you just want to push it down. This one, since we're missing the grommet, it's got a little bit of play, but this one's good. Also make sure all of the couplers and everything for the airbox is on there properly. And you can tighten down these hose clamps. Once again, there's 6mm sockets or a flathead. Let's put the strut bars back on. In order to do that, you want to slide it from underneath. There's a rubber grommet underneath the cowl. Slide that in. And what you might want to do is look in here where the bolt is in the middle. Lift up the washer with your finger and make sure this slides underneath the washer. Do the same thing for the other side. You have the 2 bolts, 1 on each strut tower. These are both E14, E-Torx 14. And the middle one is E18. Once you have everything nice and tight, you can put the cover back on. It's gonna go in at an angle, and you just want to flip it or turn it clockwise. And once it's straight up and down, you're good. For the cabin filter assembly, you want to get these tabs to slide over this rubber seal on the windshield cowl. So you're gonna have to go at it at an angle. And there is a little marker that shows you where the middle is. And that you want to line it up with this middle right here, as well as the middle of this indent. Now these covers on the bottom, I'm going to go ahead and secure those. So they just slide into that indent. And then we have 2 bolts, one right here and one on the other side. And they look like actual bolts, not screws. And these are 8mm. Now you want to route the wiring for the connector. Clip it in place how it was. The push tab goes that way and it's going to be sitting sideways. And now we have the cover. So you want to slide this and you just want to clip it in. On this side there are no connectors, so you just want to slide the cover over that and clip it in place. Now we have the cabin filter assembly, slides right over there. Then you have a total of 6 bolts. All of these bolts or screws, whatever you want to call it, they're all kind of like self-tapping, and they are all 8mm. Now you just have the air cowl in the front, clips into both sides of the airbox, and then you have the bolts in the front. We don't have this on this car, but that pretty much concludes this DIY. So that's it for this video. Make sure you go check out our website. We just released a couple of new shirts. Videos like these take quite a lot of time to make, and you know, we have to edit them and do all that. So it does help us out if you guys go support us by buying any of these shirts, or even just joining the channel as a member. There should be a link in the description or a button down below. Whatever you can do helps us out. We really do appreciate it, and we hope to keep providing you guys with quality content like we have been doing. Thanks for watching. We'll see you guys in our next video.